Welcome back to the period end closing playlist. In the video today, I'm going to demonstrate on SAP S/4HANA end-to-end how to manage a batch input session. So I'm going to start with how to check the details of the batch input session before processing, then how to process the session, what to do if we find an error in one of the transactions in the session. So you can be stuck inside the session, not able to end it and not able to skip the transaction if you don't know how to do this. So I'm going to tell you how to either skip the transaction, delete it, or cancel the session completely and reprocess it, and so on. So we're going to see this together on SAP S/4HANA, and the same applies to SAP ECC. So this video is not only related to period end closing. We can use the same instructions to manage any batch input session, but I have added it into this playlist because most of the transactions in period end closing require batch input processing. Now let's start with our demo. Here I have my SAP Fiori Launchpad, and I have created a group for all the transactions I use for reclassification, regrouping, and period end closing. And the tile I'm going to use in order to display and process the batch input sessions is this one. The Fiori tile is called My Batch Input Sessions. You can find it in the Fiori apps library. So this is the website where we can find details about any SAP Fiori tile created by SAP. So if you check, this is the standard tile to manage batch input sessions. And if you want to get access to this tile, then you have to add the business rule into your user ID. So if you work for a company, you can request this rule to be added, or if you have your own testing system, then you need to add this rule into your user ID. So you go to implementation information, and if you scroll down, here there is configuration data. You scroll down and you're going to find the business rule. So you need to have this rule in your user ID in order to be able to find the Fiori tile in your SAP Fiori Launchpad. In my system, I already have this activated and I have it assigned to my user ID. You can have access to my system. So if you would like to get access to this exact system I'm using in my demo, then you can go to my website, www.galalconsulting.com/SAP-access, and you can subscribe to the system. You will receive a user ID within one day that allows you to configure anything you want on the system. So you can configure your own company code, sales organizations, any module you would like to configure, you can go ahead, and you can also use my configuration to follow the demos I do on the channel. So this is my SAP server access. I already have the batch input session tile activated. Now I'm going to click on the tile to open it. And this will give me an overview of all the batch input sessions that are available in the system. Now let's have a look into the screen and understand the different details we have here. First, we have the session name. So this is the batch input session name. And this is a name that you either inserted yourself while creating the transaction, or that was generated automatically by SAP. If you would like to see an example of how to create a batch input session, then you can check the last video in this playlist where I explained the reclassification program. And whenever we run this program, we have to create a batch input session, and we can insert the batch input session name ourselves. So this is how we generate a batch input session. I'm not going to get into the different details of how to create it because it can be created anywhere in the system really. So it can happen in inventory management, in financial accounting, in any module. But at the end, once you have the batch input session, you have to know how to process it. So this is our batch input session name. Then we have the status. This is very clear. So either you have a paper, which means it is new, or a check mark, which means it has been processed. If you hover the mouse over the icon, it will show you what it means. Or you can also have something like this one in processing. So this is a batch input session that is being processed in background. And here we have also this one, which means incorrect. So something was wrong with the batch input session. Now, after this, we have the created by. This is the user ID that created the session. We have the user ID name. We have the date when the session was created, the time, created by which program. So this has been created by the program FAGL CL regroup. So this is the reclassification or regrouping transaction that I have shown in the last video, and then authorization user, and you have other details here. I'm not going to continue. I am going to show you the details by double clicking on the session name. So now before we process the session, I would like to understand what is inside the session. I can double click on the session name here, and we can see the different transactions that will be processed. So we have 34 transactions that will be processed once we run this session. And here on the right side, we can see the session overview. So first we have the session name created on, so this is the same details we saw outside. And then here in the overview, you can see the number of transactions. So there are 34 new transactions. The number of screens that will be processed is 238 because in each transaction, so these are accounting entries. For each transaction, there can be different screens. This is why we have too many screens. And then we have with errors. So we still don't have any errors because nothing has been processed yet. To process 34, process 0, deleted 0, current content 34, removed 0, and created 34. So we have 34 transactions that will be processed, and the transaction that will be used is FBB1. Now, if I double click here, this will also show me the screens that will be processed in each transaction if you want to go into more details. So for example, if I click on the screen, it will show me what is the input that will be inserted in each of the screens when we run this transaction in the batch input session. Now let's go back. I'm just giving you all the details, so in case you want to analyze any specific situations, you know that before processing the batch input session, you can actually go and check all the different details that will be inserted. Now let's go back. So here is our session, and now we can go ahead and process it. So we understand that there are 34 transactions inside. It has been created by the regrouping transaction, has been created by the user Abdullah01, and has been created in 03 August 2025. And I can double click on each transaction, go into the different screens, and see exactly what will be inserted. Now let's proceed and process the batch input session. So I'm going to select the session from here and click on process. And as you see here, I have processing mode. I only have two options, process foreground or display errors only. Normally, there is a third option, which is process in background, but it's not available in the standard Fiori tile. I'm not sure why. I have actually never used this transaction or this tile to process batch input sessions. There is another way that I always use. I'm going to show you now. But I have looked for this transaction only to show it to you in the demo. But as you see, we only have two options here, either foreground or errors only. Normally, there is a third one, which is background. So let me show you how to find it in case you want to process something in the background. So the standard Fiori tile doesn't have the background option. If you want to go into the other transaction to process batch input sessions that has the background option, then you go here to menu. And from here, you go to System, Services, Batch Input Sessions. And this will open the GUI transaction, which is SM35 inside SAP Fiori. And this one has the background option. So now if I click here, you have not seen any difference, but I have actually switched it from the Fiori tile into the GUI transaction. And if we choose the session now and click on process, you see that we have three options. So foreground, errors only, and background. So the background option is only available if you go into the transaction from the menu here. But if you go into the standard Fiori tile, which is this one, my batch input sessions, you are not going to find the background option, okay? Now let's go back and continue. So here we have foreground. This will allow us to see step by step what the system is doing, and we have to press enter for each screen to proceed, which can be annoying, but it is very useful to check all the details that are happening. And we also have the option to edit the entries during the session, which is very useful. The other option we have is display errors only, which means that SAP will process in foreground, it will proceed, it's not going to allow me to modify anything or even show me any details unless there is an error. So if there is any of the 34 transactions that are in the batch input sessions that has an error, then SAP is going to pause there, show me the error, and I can modify it manually. The third option is background, meaning that SAP is going to do everything in the background. If there is any transaction with an error, then SAP is just going to skip it and show it in the log that it had an error, and we can reprocess this later. But it is not going to stop when it finds an error. It's just going to continue, and then I have to check the log to find out if there has been any errors or not. Now I'm going to start with the foreground option, so this way we can see what's happening, and I can show you how to skip a transaction or how to modify some data. Whenever I do foreground or display errors only, I always choose expert mode. I have this habit because sometimes if you don't select it, SAP can show an error because it cannot find a certain field in a screen, although it is not something that's needed. I'm not sure why it happens, but I always had the habit of selecting expert mode when I do foreground. Let me show you what happens if I don't select it. So I'm not going to select expert mode for now. Let's keep it only with the default dim size. I'm not going to modify anything. So this is the standard default selection, and I'm going to process. So now we have our batch input session. SAP is automatically filling all the details. So we can see here we have the posting key, the account, If I am processing this accounting entry myself, then normally I have to insert all of these details manually. But now, because this is a batch input session, it has all the input already from the program, so it is creating the entries automatically. Now I have to press enter, and here we can see the amount, the description, and then press enter. SAP is going to proceed. We have the profit center, press enter again, and now SAP is proceeding with the second line item. So again, press enter. This is the credit. All right, okay, so now we have finished the first accounting entry. Now SAP switch it to the second accounting entry. I press enter again, and we have here the second screen and so on. So we keep pressing enter, and SAP will keep processing the different transactions. Now, all of a sudden, I'm getting this error. And I know that I have not done anything, so I have not modified anything. But if you check the error details, so no batch input data found for Dimbro. This is a screen number. This is screen name and the screen number. And this is the screen name and number that SAP is expecting. This is a technical detail, but if you would like to see the screen that you are currently on, you can go here to menu, system, status, and this will show us, if we look here, this will show the screen. So this is the screen we are in, and this is the screen number. So we are currently in SAP MF05A 330. And it's saying here that SAP is expecting the screen 330. So you see the error doesn't make any sense. So we are already in 330, but SAP is saying that no batch input entry for 330, but 330 is expected. It doesn't make sense. So it's saying that it's waiting for 330, and we are currently on 330. So, and if we try to proceed, so if I click on post or if I try to do anything, it accepted and posted the document. So this is a very strange error. Now let's proceed and see what will happen. So again, this is the following transaction, enter, enter. And here we are getting all good. It's processing well. Now we are getting the same error again. So again, SAP is expecting a screen, but there's another screen. Now, in order to avoid these errors, what I found by experience is I activate the expert mode, and these will not happen. So if I go here to menu, system, services, batch input, and here we go down in this menu, we have expert mode on. So this is the same option that we could have selected when we started the batch input session at the beginning, but I didn't. Now I can select it now. And if I want to restart the transaction we are in, because it had an error, so if I would like to restart the transaction with the error, this is very important. We go here to menu, again, system, services, batch input, and here we can either do a restart transaction, so SAP is going to restart the transaction we are in currently, or we do delete transaction, which means that SAP is going to skip it and remove it completely from the batch input session. So we cannot reprocess it with the same batch input later. It will be completely deleted. Or we do next transaction, which means that SAP is going to mark it as an error and proceed to the transaction after it. Now I'm going to click restart transaction, so SAP will restart this transaction again. And again, we press enter. And here I'm getting an error, balance in group currency USD is too large for automatic correction. So this is an error. Regardless of what error we have, I'm going to trace it later and see why we have it. But this is a good example of how to proceed when we have an error like this. So now if I try to post, I'm getting an error. So SAP is not proceeding with the batch input session. And if I restart the transaction, nothing will happen because there is an actual error here. So I can go here to system, services, batch input, restart the transaction. Let's see if it will do anything. Enter, enter. So now it's stuck here, it's not proceeding. I can click on post. And let's see what will happen. So we still have an error. So posting only possible with 0 value. I'm not going to track this transaction right now because we are in the middle of a batch input session. So what I can do is I can go here to menu, system, services, batch input, and then go to next transaction. So SAP is going to skip this transaction and go to the next one. And then again, now we proceed with the following transaction. It's working fine. If there is any error, we can either solve it on the screen immediately. So if there's an error that we can solve, we can do so. Otherwise, we skip the transaction and then we can reprocess the errors later. So now we understand the idea. So we can either restart the transaction, skip a transaction, delete the transaction. We can also modify the data ourselves in the screens if we want, if there is any reason to edit. And sometimes the system is stuck in some screens, so we just click on the button manually and it will proceed. Now, if I am done analyzing my batch input session and I would like the system to continue on its own, I don't want to check the rest of the transactions, I can go here to menu, system, services, batch input, and click on display errors only. So which means that SAP is going to proceed and it will only show me the errors if there is any. So I'm going to click here, display errors only, and SAP is going to proceed automatically without any intervention from me. I don't have to press enter anymore. And we have to wait now for SAP to finish processing all the transactions. Now the batch input session has been completed. Now I can go to session overview, and you see here my session has been marked as an error. If I want to see the details that happened inside, I can double click. So I can either select the session and go to the log or go to analysis, or I can double click on the session name. And here we have the different transactions. So you see the first one was processed, second processed, third processed. The first error we had was in the fifth. And then if I go down, so the only one that we skipped that had an error that we couldn't solve was transaction number 5. If I double click here, I can see the different screens. So I can actually see what was supposed to be inserted. And I can decide to do this entry manually without a batch input after. So we can see what is the issue, what happened, why there was an error, and then I can process this entry manually in a different transaction outside. So post general ledger entries and post it manually. If I want to see what is the exact error that was in this transaction, I can go here to the log. And you see we only have one log because we processed the batch input session only once. We can reprocess the session in order to reprocess only the errors, and then there will be multiple logs. If you have multiple logs, you can choose which log you want to see from here. So if you click here, we only have one now, but you can have multiple ones. So this log is done, we are checking. If I check here, we can see all the different messages we found. And here we have the index. So this is very important. This is the number of the transaction where the message appeared. So transaction 1 has been processed successfully, but in the middle we had the error of the screen, and then we processed it in a different way. Either we proceeded manually or whatever, but this is for transaction number 1. And you see here, so if you check below, so here you can see transaction restarted by user. And then after we restarted it, there was a document posted, and this is the number of the document. So you can see all the details. Everything has been logged. Now we continue to transaction number 2 and so on. The error was in transaction number 5. So we can go here, scroll down until number 5, and you will see the log of what errors we found. So here is transaction number 5. So these are the messages. So we have no batch input data, no batch input data. If you scroll down, we can see all the different messages we received. And at the end, transaction error. So data changed previously, transaction started by user. So we can see there was something wrong with the transaction. It doesn't really clarify what was wrong, but we can see that the transaction ended with an error. So we know that we have to either reprocess it by the batch input session or we do it manually. And if you would like to do it manually, we can copy the details from the screens as I just showed you. So you go here to transactions, double click on the transaction. You have the different, if you go to Dimpros, you have the different screens related to transaction number 5, and it has all the input that needs to be filled. So we can go ahead and do the entry manually. Now, if we continue checking the log, if we go to the end, so after this, we didn't have any errors. So all the other transactions were posted successfully. We have all the document numbers here. So this is the financial accounting document number, so we can display it if we want. And if we go at the end here, we have a summary showing that we have 1 transaction with errors. So 34 transactions read, 33 processed, 1 transaction with errors, 0 transaction deleted, and the batch input session, batch input processing ended. Now, we can correct the error that happened. So for example, if a period was closed or something that we need to fix, we can fix it and then reprocess the same batch input session. Let's do this now. So now I'm going to select the session, and again, I'm going to process. If we do this, SAP is only going to process the transactions that had an error. It's not going to duplicate anything. Only the ones that had an error will be processed. So now click on process, and let's do it in the foreground. Now we continue pressing enter as we just did before. Now I want to add one more thing. If you would like to cancel the batch input session while you are in the middle for any reason, so you still have like 50 transactions to process, but you would like to cancel the session and exit right now, you can do this by going here. Again, go to Systems, Services, Batch Input Session, Batch Input, and then here you have Cancel. If you click on Cancel, SAP is going to terminate this session. So click on Cancel, and it has been terminated. It's still marked with an error because it still has errors, but we were able to exit the batch input processing. Now let's go back in and process this last transaction. I'm going to process it in display errors only. If there is an error, it will show us, and we have no errors. So we have not actually fixed anything, right? When we did the foreground processing, there was an error, but when we processed in display errors only, there was no error. So there are sometimes issues that happen when we process the batch input session in foreground that don't really make sense. So my advice to you is, if you find something that doesn't make sense while you are processing the session, like for example what we did now, we are posting 34 transactions of the same kind, and one transaction is showing there is an error with the group currency. If there is an error with the group currency, then all of them should fail. So it's not a real error. So I advise you, whenever you run a batch input session and you find some errors, if you do it in the foreground, then reprocess it in the background or reprocess it in display errors only, because sometimes the error is only because the recording transaction of the batch is not able to process something. So you reprocess it in background or in display errors only, and maybe the error will be solved automatically without any intervention. Now let's go back to session overview, and now our session has been marked as processed. If we go here to the details, so double click, you can see that we have all the transactions processed. We don't have any errors. If you look here in the summary, you can see that we have transactions processed 34, current content 34, created 34. So we have nothing to be processed. We have nothing that has failed. Now, if we switch here to the log, you can see that we have the number 4 here, which means there are 4 logs. To choose the log that you want to see, you click on logs, and you can find all of them here with the date and the time where the log was created. So first, this is our first run. This is the second one that we canceled in the middle. This is a third one, and then the last one that we processed. Now let's go here and check the last one. So this is, if we go to logs, let's choose the last one. So number 4, double click, or choose it and then click on transfer. So in this session, we only had one document posted. So SAP did not repost the transactions that were successful. It only processed the transaction that had an error. And this is index 5. So this is transaction number 5 that failed before. And here we have one transaction read, one transaction processed, no errors. If we check the other logs, for example, number 3, so select it, click on transfer, we can see here that session is being processed, batch input processing cancelled. So it's showing that the session has been cancelled, and this is the timestamp. So here we have one transaction read, 0 processed, and 1 with errors. This is why when we did another run, SAP reprocessed the transaction. Now, if I try to reprocess the same batch input session, SAP is not going to allow me because it has already been fully processed. So you can see here, the requested session cannot be processed. It has already been fully processed, and SAP is not going to duplicate any postings. And this is it for the demo today. I hope it was easy to follow and understand. We have investigated together how to process batch input sessions. I know some tricks, so how to restart the transactions, how to skip them, how to cancel a session, and so on. But whenever I process a batch input session in foreground, something unexpected can happen. So even after all of these years, some strange things can happen when you process a batch input in the foreground. This is why I always have the habit of reprocessing in the background if you find any errors before you start analyzing and wasting your time, because most of the time the errors will be solved automatically. If you have any tips and tricks of your own on how to manage batch input sessions, then please share them with me in the comments. I would be happy to read them and learn from you. If you have any questions or if you have any comments, don't hesitate to leave me a comment. Don't forget to share the video with your connections. Also subscribe to the channel, join the channel membership program so you can get access to the member exclusive videos and the member exclusive documents and our private Slack channel. I keep repeating this in each video because until today, I still get questions of how to access a member video, for example. So you need to join the channel membership program either on YouTube or on Patreon, and you will get access to these videos. Also, you can subscribe to the same SAP server access I am using. If you would like to get access to a testing system, so you can test your processes, configure anything you want, then you can subscribe to this service. And you can also book a private appointment with me if you would like to discuss anything related to interviews, related to the career, to the freelancing rates, or anything in general. All the details you can find on my website, www.galalconsulting.com or www.galalacademy.com. Both of them are the same website. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you again soon.